Hello, I'm Hannah, and this is Hannah's Books. Welcome to another episode of Reads and Rambles, a somewhat irregular series where I talk about both bookish and non-bookish things that have been happening in my life recently. While my family was in Boston, and I was out late one night at Hyde Cottage talking books and having wine and calzones with Steve Donahue, my spouse tried to keep himself entertained and awake enough to welcome me back home by watching a new show on Netflix, one called The Chair. I'm not sure how much he knew about it before, but after seeing the first couple of short episodes, he decided to put the rest on hold until I could watch one and decide if I wanted to watch the rest with him. Although I'm not a huge television fan in general, David thought I might be interested in a show about a female professor who had just become the chair of the literature department at her university. As a former history professor, I couldn't resist trying one out, even though I had to admit that I was skeptical that academic department drama would be anything but mocked. Now that I've seen all the episodes, I would say that it portrays the academic life as much cushier than it really is, even at the most prestigious schools in the country. There are things I love about the show and things I very much dislike about its general style, but my evaluations of these are mostly based on just my personal taste and personal interests. There is a larger issue about the show that I find quite interesting culturally, though. The show is, at least to a degree, aimed at educated adults in their late 20s to maybe 50s or so on the liberal or left side of the political spectrum. Who else would watch a television show where the main perspective represents youngish and middle-aged faculty members in a literature department? Of course, there are other characters shown, undergraduates and a couple of graduate students, much older professors in the department, the very young daughter of the department chair, and the chair's father. While all of these characters are interesting, we really see the world through the eyes of those in the middle ranges, and it's their questions and concerns that are at the heart of the show. The new department chair is a woman of color, a Korean woman who is called a lady department chair by some of the older men in the mostly white department. Against what is sometimes this cringeworthy but not actively cruel backdrop, she seeks to modernize and diversify the faculty. Declining enrollments are the main reason the university is putting pressure on the English department. A key point in the plot is that the department chair is committed to give tenure to a hotshot new scholar who's currently being recruited by at least two top-tier universities. That scholar is a black woman, and viewers see that despite her innovative and rigorous scholarship, the older faculty members in the department struggle with accepting her as one of their own in awkward ways that are often portrayed with both nuance and a fair degree of empathy for the older scholars. Sometimes the portrayal of the elder department members is a bit more mocking, but the people who are treated with the least empathy are the undergraduates. Their political engagement seems utterly performative and thoughtless, and their anger about a particular issue seems to be not so much about the event that actually happened, which was certainly worth a serious discussion, but about a deliberate recasting of the event, including photoshopped images, etc. Instead of talking about the sometimes thoughtless missteps made by professors and how to address those in the context of higher education, we get a story that sometimes leans towards treating the fallout of the event as if it's an example of cancel culture built on trickery. I found it interesting that the creators, or perhaps Netflix, seemed to think that viewers of even a show like this might want to see the student opposition to the event in question be portrayed as unbelievably simplistic cancel culture. While we do see the adult perpetrator eventually come around to a more subtle reckoning with the effects of his own actual behavior, the mob mentality of the students, including a big dose of deceit, seems to rule the day until then. When I picked up a recent New York Times book review, I was intrigued to see some similar critiques of supposedly progressive politics. In general, the thinking was deeper and more serious than what we see in the television show. David French reviews a collection of selected writing by Andrew Sullivan about culture and politics, and writes about how powerful he finds it that Sullivan shows how he changes his mind over time, how he sometimes made even major missteps, etc. The review has this great passage. This world is almost impossibly complex. Conventional wisdom is frequently wrong. It's not difficult to be a partisan bomb thrower. Partisans don't want to look in the mirror and ponder the sin on their own side. And then the reviewer says that Andrew Sullivan is the man with the mirror, holding it up to a world increasingly yielding to authoritarian temptation. Sullivan shouts into that mirror, "Look at yourself. Look at what you're becoming." I wonder if that was the message the chair was trying to send. Were we supposed to see the adult perpetrator's defensiveness as an unwillingness to hold up the mirror? Were we supposed to see the undergraduate's simplistic and exaggerated portrayal of the events, and then their bald cancel culture demands as an inability to hold up the mirror? It strikes me that the show's portrayal of both situations reflected exactly that authoritarian temptation that David French was alluding to in the New York Times. Well, anyway, recently I watched an interesting discussion about the chair where a real-life hotshot news scholar and now Oxford Don, Merve Imre, served as interviewer. More about Imre in a moment. Partly because the interviewee was one of the creators, and partly because the interviewer and the interviewee had been roommates back when they were in school, both studying literature, there wasn't a lot of real critique. There was a mention that the increasingly central role of adjunct professors was not a factor in the plot at all, and that many relatively young professors viewing the show were disappointed not to see their tenuous positions, that is, tenuous, not tenured, discussed publicly and sympathetically. Well, that could definitely make a show of its own. Thinking about adjunct professorships, which became quite a thing in the years after I was hired by my university, made me look up a powerful review essay from the magazine The Nation, written by the author of one of my favorite books from last year, The Equivalents. Maggie Doherty is reviewing 2 novels about adjunct professors, a new kind of campus novel, she suggests. And here's what she says about the position of adjuncts. These adjunct novels are versions of the Bildungsroman, the novel of education. But here, education means learning just how precarious your future is. Will these adjuncts be able to pay their rent, afford health care, bear and care for children? Will they have anything like the future they dreamed of when they were young? The protagonists are stuck in limbo. There's nowhere to go but down. She continues, in both novels' plot, the literary structure that signals progress gives way to an atmosphere of anxious uncertainty, one familiar to many of us who came of age during a moment of financial and ecological crisis. It's a powerful essay, and one that, in addition to highlighting the uncertainty of adjunct life and the uncertainty of our current lives overall, points out that this may be why so many contemporary novels end with a real sense of uncertainty. Today's novels not infrequently end without any real progress or resolution, just as so many modern characters know they will never have any real progress or resolution in their own lives. Fascinating interpretation, and although it doesn't make me like those endings that just stop, it does make me understand why we might be seeing so many more in that style right now. Well, let me circle back to Merve Imre for another moment. As I said, she was an interviewer for the discussion about the show The Chair, but Imre is also the editor and annotator of a stunning new edition of Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. I published a long review of it in the journal On the Seawall, which I will link in the description box, so I'm not going to talk about it in detail. But I did want to share 1 or 2 of her personal stories from her introduction to the annotated edition. When Liverite, a division of W.W. Norton, asked her to provide the notes for the annotated edition, the publishers offered to make a fresh transcription for her to work from. She turned them down, considering Woolf's own sense that readers should in some way try to become the authors they're reading. So, as she says, I said I would type the manuscript myself. I'm intrigued by how this kind of choice might influence how she saw Woolf's novel. In an interview, Imre quotes Woolf's own passage about the feeling of becoming one with an author, and then explains that typing out the text made her feel that sense of connection in a way she never really had before. In a sense, she was the writer at that moment and could feel how the story and style developed. The text started feeling like a part of the annotator. I think back to times when I've been successful at keeping a commonplace book, full of quotes I found meaningful in books I loved, and how those lines have continued to live in me in a way that sections I just underlined in a book just haven't. I suppose that's somehow related. The other Merve Imre anecdote I want to share from her introduction to Mrs. Dalloway is her story of when she first read the novel. She talks about being 10 or 11 years old, too young to understand most of the emotions in the story. She was away from home, writing letters back and forth with a young friend, a first love. And after she finished Mrs. Dalloway, she mailed her copy to her friend, suggesting that the two young readers were like Clarissa and Peter, the two young lovers in the novel. He wrote back, and after reading the novel, insisted that they were not Clarissa and Peter, but instead Jake Barnes and Lady Brett Ashley from Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises. Perhaps her young friend did not quite understand the dynamic in that novel very well. But Imre goes on to say that she admires the way the two innocent readers, quote, sought some continuity between our lives and the lives we read about in fiction. Imre's story made me remember the introduction to another novel by Virginia Woolf, To the Lighthouse. This introduction appears in an edition I don't own, but was able to find in my public library. And it was written by one of my very favorite authors, Eudora Welty. Let me read what she says about her first experience with Woolf. As it happened, I came to discover To the Lighthouse for myself. If it seems unbelievable today, this was possible to do in 1930 in Mississippi, when I was young, reading at my own will and as pleasure led me. Blessed with luck and innocence, I fell upon the novel that once and forever opened the door of imaginative fiction for me, and read it cold in all its wonder and magnitude. What a joy to find that Eudora Welty loved Virginia Woolf, and that Imre's story of discovery was not dissimilar to the way Welty began her own introduction. Well, that will do it for today, I think. Next time on Reads and Rambles, I hope to talk about a couple of buddy reads I've been part of. One of Thomas Hardy's Jude the Obscure, which I had the pleasure to read recently with Lukács, A Cruel Reader's Thesis, and one a while ago now, of Paula Byrne's biography of Barbara Pym, which I read with Sean, the book maniac. Reading and talking with fellow readers was an absolute joy in both cases. Thanks very much to all of you for joining me today here on Hannah's Books. See you soon.